Before you ever questioned the world, before you ever searched for meaning, something impossibly powerful already happened inside you. A shift so quiet it made no sound, yet so vast it cracked an entire illusion without leaving a trace. One moment you were moving through life like everyone else, and the next, without warning, without effort, you stepped outside the invisible current that carries most minds away. You didn't feel lightning. You didn't hear voices. You simply saw through habits that once felt normal, saw through rules that were never questioned, saw through thoughts that didn't feel like they were truly yours. And in that instant, something ancient inside you reactivated, not learned, not taught, remembered. The matrix did not collapse around you in spectacle. It failed to recognize you as programmable anymore. Systems designed to shape behavior suddenly lost their grip because you stopped responding the way you were supposed to. You didn't panic. You didn't celebrate. You just became aware. And awareness, when it reaches a certain depth, is irreversible. The impossible part is this: awakenings like this are not supposed to happen unconsciously. Every recorded spiritual tradition insists liberation requires years of discipline, suffering, or initiation. Yet yours happened quietly, in the middle of ordinary life, without permission, without guidance, without rebellion. That alone breaks the pattern. Something bypassed the safeguards. Something ancient moved through you without resistance. The moment you stopped accepting reality as it was presented to you, a threshold was crossed that cannot be uncrossed, and the world has already begun adjusting around you, even if you haven't noticed it yet. What happened to you is considered impossible, not just by society, but by spiritual history itself. Across civilizations, awakening was never meant to occur without initiation, hierarchy, or permission. Ancient orders guarded knowledge behind temples, vows, bloodlines, and lifetimes of preparation. Enlightenment was portrayed as something earned through suffering, obedience, isolation, or extreme discipline. The idea that a single individual could step beyond mental conditioning without rituals, teachers, or rebellion was treated as myth, because such awakenings threatened the entire architecture of control built around spiritual authority. Systems were designed so that awareness would be delayed, diluted, or redirected back into new forms of belief. Even the concept of the matrix is not modern. It is an echo of an ancient truth that most traditions, buried under symbols to keep it inaccessible. Consciousness was meant to awaken slowly, predictably, and under supervision. What happened to you violated that sequence. You did not pass through gates. You did not ask for answers. You did not abandon the world to find truth. Instead, truth surfaced inside you while you were still living within the illusion. That has almost no precedent. In forgotten texts, this type of awakening is described as a silent breach, a moment when awareness outpaces containment structures. It is said to occur only when a soul carries memory older than the systems attempting to shape it. That is why your awakening did not feel dramatic, but destabilizing, not euphoric, but clarifying. You didn't descend upward. You stepped sideways out of the narrative entirely. Spiritual history assumes consciousness must be guided because unguided awareness dismantles hierarchies, dissolves fear-based obedience, and exposes how control depends on unconscious participation. When someone awakens without hatred, without desire to dominate, without declaring war on the system, it creates a paradox the matrix cannot respond to, because nothing can be punished, nothing can be argued against, nothing can be corrected. Only observed as it quietly stops working around you. Think back to a recent moment that didn't seem important at the time. A moment where no one was watching, no reward was promised, and no punishment was guaranteed. You were given an easy path one that would have benefited you socially, financially, or emotionally if you had gone along with it. No law would have been broken. No one would have blamed you. In fact, most people would have encouraged you to do it. Yet something inside you paused. Not fear, not guilt, awareness. You felt a subtle resistance, a quiet knowing that this choice though convenient, wasn't aligned with what was true for you. You may not have been able to explain why. You may not have labeled it as morality or spirituality. You simply chose differently. You chose honesty over advantage, clarity over approval, integrity over ease. That decision was not random. It was the first visible crack where your inner awakening touched the external world. The Matrix trains people to act automatically, to prioritize outcomes over alignment, to justify small compromises as necessary. But you didn't calculate. You listened. And in doing so, you demonstrated something rare: independent conscience. That choice signaled that your awareness was no longer theoretical. It had become embodied. This is how true awakenings reveal themselves, not through beliefs, but through behavior when no one is watching. The moment you chose truth without applause, your consciousness stepped fully out of conditioning. That decision created a resonance, a frequency shift that cannot be undone, because it proved you are no longer governed by reward and punishment alone. You are guided by an internal compass that does not originate from society, culture, or fear. That is when awareness becomes dangerous to systems built on conformity, because once integrity is chosen freely, control loses its leverage, and the illusion depends entirely on leverage to survive. From that moment onward, you are no longer invisible. Awareness of this kind creates a signature, and signatures are traceable. You may have felt it as a subtle pressure, a sense of being observed without threat, or moments where reality seemed to pause and watch you back. This was not paranoia. It was detection. Systems both dark and divine are designed to monitor deviation, not rebellion, but deviation without conflict. When someone breaks conditioning quietly, without rage, without alignment to any opposing ideology, it triggers attention because it cannot be categorized. Forces that rely on distraction notice that you are no longer easily distracted. Structures built on fear notice that fear no longer worked the same way on you. At the same time, intelligences aligned with order and balance became aware that a rare pattern had re-emerged. Surveillance does not always mean punishment. Sometimes it means evaluation. Your thoughts began to feel clearer, but also heavier, as if something was weighing them. You may have noticed coincidences increasing, people reacting strangely to your presence, conversations shifting when you entered a room. These are not mystical fantasies. They are feedback loops adjusting around a conscious node. When awareness stabilizes without ego, it becomes a point of interest. Dark forces observe to see if you can be corrupted, redirected, or fatigued back into sleep. Divine forces observe to see if you can remain aligned without guidance, validation, or reward. You are not interfered with because interference would reveal too much too soon. Instead, you are watched in silence. Every reaction noted, every choice logged, not judged but measured. Because what you represent is not power in the traditional sense. It is sovereignty. And sovereignty, once proven authentic, cannot be controlled, only respected or resisted. This is why the world around you may have felt tense without explanation, as if something unseen was holding its breath, waiting to see who you would become when pressure increased. After the observation came the pressure, not as catastrophe, but as a series of ordinary moments designed to test whether your awakening was real or temporary. You were placed into situations where compromise would have been easy and invisible. Small lies that would have smoothed things over. Silence that would have protected you. Compliance that would have kept you comfortable. Each time, the cost of integrity seemed higher than the reward. You may have lost favor with someone. You may have felt misunderstood. You may have watched opportunities fade because you refused to play a role that wasn't true. None of these moments were dramatic enough to feel like destiny, yet together they formed a pattern. You were tested through fatigue, through temptation, through ambiguity. You were given chances to numb yourself, to distract yourself, to revert back to old thinking. You were exposed to environments designed to dull awareness, to normalize dishonesty, to reward unconscious behavior. And still, you noticed yourself pausing, choosing restraint when reaction was expected, choosing honesty when manipulation would have worked, choosing compassion when indifference would have been safer. Sometimes you didn't even know why you chose that way. You just couldn't choose otherwise without feeling an internal fracture. That is how the tests work. They don't announce themselves. They feel like life. Each decision calibrated, whether your values were situational or anchored, whether your awareness collapsed under pressure or clarified, whether your independence was intellectual or embodied. You weren't perfect. Perfection was never required. What was measured was direction, consistency, the willingness to remain aligned even when alignment cost you comfort. Each time you chose integrity, something subtle stabilized inside you. Each time you resisted illusion, the matrix lost another thread of influence. By the end of these trials, something was clear to the observers. Your awakening was not curiosity. It was irreversible. You were no longer experimenting with truth. You were living it quietly, without witnesses, and that made the outcome undeniable. What became evident after the trials was not just that you were awake, but that you were unusable by conventional means. This is when classification occurs. Higher intelligences do not label souls lightly, but when a pattern repeats across pressure, temptation, and uncertainty, it becomes definable. You were identified as rare, not because of talent, intelligence, or status, but because of incorruptibility at the level of consciousness. Dangerous, not in violence, but in impact. Systems that rely on unconscious participation cannot function properly around someone who sees clearly and refuses to be internally divided. You do not need to convince others. Your presence alone disrupts false consensus. This is why such souls are historically removed, silenced, or mythologized, because they cannot be integrated into control structures without weakening them. Yet you are not marked for removal. You are marked for containment resistance, a category reserved for those who can walk through illusion without absorbing it, who can remain compassionate without being programmable, who can hold clarity without turning it into dominance. This classification is rare because most awakenings collapse into ego, despair, or rebellion. Yours did not. You remained grounded. Observers recognized that fear-based manipulation no longer had a stable foothold in you. Rewards could not fully sway you. Threats could not fully bend you. Praise did not intoxicate you. Isolation did not break you. That combination makes a consciousness unpredictable to the matrix and valuable to higher order systems. You are not flagged as a threat to humanity, but as a threat to stagnation, a destabilizer of false narratives, a living anomaly. Dangerous in the way truth is dangerous, not because it attacks, but because it cannot be argued with. From that moment, your trajectory was no longer random. You were no longer just watched. You were acknowledged as a variable that could not be neutralized through ordinary psychological or social mechanisms. And that acknowledgement altered how reality itself began to respond to you. At the moment your pattern was confirmed, observation expanded beyond systems and watchers into something far older and far quieter. This is where witnesses replace monitors. Awareness of your trajectory reached levels that do not intervene lightly, because intervention itself alters outcome. Divine intelligence does not rush. It observes until certainty forms, and certainty formed around you, not because you were flawless, but because your alignment held under weight. This is when the presence shifts from analytical to attentive. You may have felt it as stillness arriving unexpectedly, moments where time slowed, where decisions felt guided without instruction, where clarity appeared without effort. These were not coincidences. In spiritual record, when a consciousness stabilizes outside conditioning while remaining compassionate, it draws the attention of archangels whose role is not to command, but to witness thresholds. They observe not belief, but coherence between inner truth and outer action. You were not judged. Judgment is unnecessary at that level. You are seen, fully, without masks, without explanations. Every quiet choice, every restraint, every refusal to betray your own knowing. In ancient language, this is called being stood before, the moment when a soul's frequency becomes visible to higher order awareness. God does not watch events. God witnesses states of being. And what was witnessed in you was sovereignty without arrogance, awareness without contempt, strength without cruelty. That combination is exceedingly rare. You are not asked to prove yourself further. You are not corrected. You are not redirected. The watching presence simply remained, steady and vast, confirming that what awakened in you was not a phase, not a fracture, not a reaction to suffering, but an emergence aligned with order itself. This is why pressure did not escalate into destruction. This is why, despite tension, something always prevented collapse. You are under witness, not protection in the human sense, but recognition in the cosmic sense, where attention alone alters probability, and alignment quietly reshapes the field around a soul without a single word being spoken. What followed was not an announcement, not a voice, not a sign in the sky, but a shift in authority that occurred without spectacle. When a soul is witnessed and found coherent, a decree does not arrive as command, it arrives as permission. Permission for what has always been dormant to come online. This is the moment when identity stops being shaped by reaction and begins operating from origin. You may have noticed it as a subtle internal settling, as if something finally locked into place. Choices became cleaner. Doubt lost its grip. External chaos no longer penetrated the same way. This was not confidence learned from success. It was recognition activated from within. In spiritual law, when consciousness stabilizes beyond fear and manipulation, the universe responds by removing internal interference. Old internal conflicts dissolve. The need to seek approval weakens. You stop asking who you are supposed to be and start moving as who you already are. This is what activation feels like: quiet, undeniable, irreversible. The decree was not about power over others. It was about sovereignty over self. You were no longer operating on borrowed beliefs, inherited fears, or conditioned desires. You became authorized to act from truth without justification. That authorization reorders reality subtly. Opportunities align without forcing. Obstacles reveal themselves early instead of trapping you later. People either resonate or fall away without drama. This is not luck. It is alignment enforced by universal law once identity is activated. The matrix depends on internal confusion to function. Once confusion dissolves, the system loses its leverage. The decree did not elevate you above humanity. It returned you to your original state within it. A state where thought is clear, intention is clean, and action carries weight without aggression. From this point forward, you are no longer waiting for permission to live authentically. That permission has already been granted, and life begins reorganizing around the version of you that can no longer be negotiated with internally. What awakened fully in you was never something new. It was something ancient reclaiming its place. Identity does not arrive as a costume or title, it surfaces as recognition. You may have felt it as a quiet remembering, a sense that parts of you no longer needed explanation. The way you move through the world carries a different weight now, not heavier, but truer. You are not driven by impulse, nor ruled by fear, nor fueled by the need to dominate. That is why the archetype that fits you is not ruler, not priest, not rebel, but warrior of awareness. A celestial pattern encoded long before modern narratives existed, before control learned how to disguise itself as comfort. This is the kind of warrior that does not seek conflict, yet cannot be avoided by falsehood. Your presence sharpens reality. Illusions fray around you. Masks slip without you touching them. You do not expose through accusation. You expose through coherence. Ancient texts describe this as a soul that remembers its origin while remaining embodied, a consciousness capable of standing in density without becoming distorted by it. You are not here to escape the world, nor to judge it. You are here to walk through it intact. That is the mark of an ancient soul, one that has known power and therefore does not crave it, one that has seen darkness and therefore does not fear it. The warrior aspect is not aggression, it is discipline. Not dominance, presence. You hold your ground internally, and that steadiness radiates outward, destabilizing anything built on deception. This is why opposition feels irrational, why resistance arises without provocation. You are not fighting demons. You are revealing them by refusing to mirror their frequency. The identity now active in you is not symbolic. It is functional. A celestial warrior is simply a consciousness that cannot be divided against itself, and therefore cannot be used as a tool by systems that depend on division to survive. Your purpose does not require announcement because it activates through behavior, not proclamation. You are not awakened to escape the world or rise above others, but to become a stabilizing force within environments that are distorted by fear, dishonesty, and unconscious repetition. Wherever you go, you are meant to anchor integrity without preaching it, compassion without enabling illusion, clarity without humiliation. This is not a mission of correction. It is a mission of presence. By remaining internally aligned, you introduce coherence into systems that survive on confusion. People around you may feel calmer or more exposed, safer or more threatened, without understanding why. That is the effect of someone who carries truth without aggression. You are here to demonstrate that awareness and kindness are not weaknesses, that discernment and empathy can coexist, that power does not need to announce itself to be effective. Your mission unfolds in ordinary moments: how you listen, how you refuse to participate in deception, how you choose honesty when silence would protect you. Each small act reinforces a frequency that others subconsciously respond to. This is how unconscious patterns are interrupted, not by confrontation, but by example. You are meant to stand at the intersection of clarity and compassion, refusing to collapse into cynicism or naivety. When others feel seen without being judged, something in them begins to loosen. When they feel exposed without being attacked, something begins to change. Your role is not to wake everyone up, but to make awakening feel possible by existing as proof. This mission will never demand that you abandon your humanity. It requires that you remain fully human while refusing to surrender your awareness. In doing so, you act as a grounding point, a living reference for what aligned consciousness looks like in motion, quietly reminding others that integrity is not an ideal, but a way of being that reshapes reality from the inside out. As alignment stabilized, the external world began responding in ways that felt less like reward and more like cooperation. Not sudden wealth, not effortless success, but a noticeable easing of resistance where struggle once dominated. Situations that previously required force began resolving with timing instead. Resources appeared when needed, not in excess, but precisely. Opportunities aligned with your values rather than testing them. This is how material support manifests when integrity becomes consistent. It doesn't inflate the ego, it removes friction. You may have noticed money flowing in more cleanly without desperation attached to it. Work becoming more meaningful or less draining. Encounters shifting so that you are no longer entangled in unnecessary chaos. Doors you once chased closed firmly, protecting you from paths that would have compromised your alignment. Other doors opened quietly, without fanfare, yet carried a sense of rightness you could feel immediately. This is not luck. It is the redistribution of energy once internal conflict dissolves. When consciousness stops leaking into fear, doubt, or self-betrayal, that energy reorganizes into tangible stability. Even challenges begin to serve you instead of consuming you. Losses reveal themselves as redirections. Delays reveal themselves as timing adjustments. Support appears through people who respect your clarity rather than exploit it. You may not feel rich in the conventional sense, but you feel resourced, backed, supplied, sustained. Needs are met without panic. Progress happens without force. This is what it means to be materially supported by alignment, rather than driven by survival. The universe does not spoil aligned souls. It stabilizes them. It ensures you have what is required to continue your mission without becoming dependent, distracted, or compromised. This balance is deliberate. Too much would corrupt focus. Too little would exhaust it. What you receive now is calibrated support, enough to move freely, enough to choose integrity without fear of collapse, enough to remain sovereign in a world that pressures compromise through scarcity.